The dynamic process by which the single-cell human zygote becomes a 100 trillion cell adult is perhaps the most remarkable phenomenon in all of nature. Researchers now know that many of the routine functions performed by the adult body become established during pregnancy, often long before birth. The developmental period before birth is increasingly understood as a time of preparation, during which the developing human acquires the many structures and practices the many skills needed for survival after birth. Pregnancy in humans normally lasts approximately 38 weeks, as measured from the time of fertilization or conception until birth. During the first 8 weeks following fertilization, the developing human is called an embryo, which means growing within. This time, called the embryonic period, is characterized by the formation of most major body systems. From the completion of 8 weeks until the end of pregnancy, the developing human is called a fetus, which means unborn offspring. During this time, called the fetal period, the body grows larger and its systems begin to function. All embryonic and fetal ages in this program refer to the time since fertilization. Biologically speaking, human development begins at fertilization, when a woman and a man each combine 23 of their own chromosomes through the union of their reproductive cells. A woman's reproductive cell is commonly called an egg, but the correct term is oocyte. Likewise, a man's reproductive cell is widely known as a sperm, but the preferred term is spermatozoan. Following the release of an oocyte from a woman's ovary in a process called ovulation, the oocyte and spermatozoan join within one of the uterine tubes, which are often referred to as fallopian tubes. The uterine tubes link a woman's ovaries to her uterus or womb. The resulting single-cell embryo is called a zygote, meaning yoked or joined together. The zygote's 46 chromosomes represent the unique first edition of a new individual's complete genetic blueprint. This master plan resides in tightly coiled molecules called DNA. They contain the instructions for the development of the entire body. DNA molecules resemble a twisted ladder known as a double helix. The rungs of the ladder are made up of paired molecules or bases called guanine, cytosine, adenine, and thymine. Guanine pairs only with cytosine, and adenine with thymine. Each human cell contains approximately 3 billion of these base pairs. The DNA of a single cell contains so much information that if it were represented in printed words, simply listing the first letter of each base would require over 1.5 million pages of text. If laid end to end, the DNA in a single human cell measures 3 1/3 feet or 1 meter. If we could uncoil all of the DNA within an adult's 100 trillion cells, it would extend over 63 billion miles. This distance reaches from the Earth to the Sun and back 340 times. Approximately 24 to 30 hours after fertilization, the zygote completes its first cell division. Through the process of mitosis, one cell splits into two, two into four, and so on. As early as 24 to 48 hours after fertilization begins, pregnancy can be confirmed by detecting a hormone called early pregnancy factor in the mother's blood. By 3 to 4 days after fertilization, the dividing cells of the embryo assume a spherical shape, and the embryo is called a morula. By 4 to 5 days, a cavity forms within this ball of cells, and the embryo is then called a blastocyst. The cells inside the blastocyst are called the inner cell mass and give rise to the head, body, and other structures vital to the developing human. Cells within the inner cell mass are called embryonic stem cells because they have the ability to form each of the more than 200 cell types contained in the human body. After travelling down the uterine tube, the early embryo embeds itself into the inner wall of the mother's uterus. This process, called implantation, begins 6 days and ends 10 to 12 days after fertilization. Cells from the growing embryo begin to produce a hormone called human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG, the substance detected by most pregnancy tests. HCG directs maternal hormones to interrupt the normal menstrual cycle, allowing pregnancy to continue. Following implantation, cells on the periphery of the blastocyst give rise to part of a structure called the placenta, which serves as an interface between the maternal and embryonic circulatory systems. The placenta delivers maternal oxygen, nutrients, hormones, and medications to the developing human, removes all waste products, and prevents maternal blood from mixing with the blood of the embryo and fetus. The placenta also produces hormones and maintains embryonic and fetal body temperature slightly above that of the mother's. The placenta communicates with the developing human through the vessels of the umbilical cord. The life support capabilities of the placenta rival those of intensive care units found in modern hospitals. By 1 week, cells of the inner cell mass form 2 layers called the hypoblast and epiblast. The hypoblast gives rise to the yolk sac, which is one of the structures through which the mother supplies nutrients to the early embryo. Cells from the epiblast form a membrane called the amnion, within which the embryo and later the fetus develop until birth. By approximately 2.5 weeks, the epiblast has formed 3 specialized tissues or germ layers called ectoderm, endoderm, and mesoderm. Ectoderm gives rise to numerous structures, including the brain, spinal cord, nerves, skin, nails, and hair. Endoderm produces the lining of the respiratory system and digestive tract, and generates portions of major organs such as the liver and pancreas. Mesoderm forms the heart, kidneys, bones, cartilage, muscles, blood cells, and other structures. By 3 weeks, the brain is dividing into 3 primary sections called the forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. Development of the respiratory and digestive systems is also underway. As the first blood cells appear in the yolk sac, blood vessels form throughout the embryo, and the tubular heart emerges. Almost immediately, the rapidly growing heart folds in upon itself as separate chambers begin to develop. The heart begins beating 3 weeks and 1 day following fertilization. The circulatory system is the first body system or group of related organs to achieve a functional state. Between 3 and 4 weeks, the body plan emerges as the brain, spinal cord, and heart of the embryo are easily identified alongside the yolk sac. Rapid growth causes folding of the relatively flat embryo. This process incorporates part of the yolk sac into the lining of the digestive system and forms the chest and abdominal cavities of the developing human. By 4 weeks, the clear amnion surrounds the embryo in a fluid-filled sac. This sterile liquid, called amniotic fluid, provides the embryo with protection from injury. The heart typically beats about 113 times per minute. Note how the heart changes colour as blood enters and leaves its chambers with each beat. The heart will beat approximately 54 million times before birth and over 3.2 billion times over the course of an 80-year lifespan. Rapid brain growth is evidenced by the changing appearance of the forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. Upper and lower limb development begins with the appearance of the limb buds by 4 weeks. The skin is transparent at this point because it is only 1 cell thick. As the skin thickens, it will lose this transparency, which means that we will only be able to watch internal organs develop for about another month. Between 4 and 5 weeks, the brain continues its rapid growth and divides into 5 distinct sections. The head comprises about 1/3 of the embryo's total size. The cerebral hemispheres appear, gradually becoming the largest parts of the brain. Functions eventually controlled by the cerebral hemispheres include thought, learning, memory, speech, vision, hearing, voluntary movement, and problem solving. In the respiratory system, the right and left main stem bronchi are present. And will eventually connect the trachea or windpipe with the lungs. Note the massive liver filling the abdomen, adjacent to the beating heart. The permanent kidneys appear by 5 weeks. The yolk sac contains early reproductive cells called germ cells. By 5 weeks, these germ cells migrate to the reproductive organs adjacent to the kidneys. Also by 5 weeks, the embryo develops handplates, and cartilage formation begins by 5.5 weeks. Here we see the left hand plate and wrist at 5 weeks and 6 days. By 6 weeks, the cerebral hemispheres are growing disproportionately faster than other sections of the brain. The embryo begins to make spontaneous and reflexive movements. Such movement is necessary to promote normal neuromuscular development. A touch to the mouth area causes the embryo to reflexively withdraw its head. The external ear is beginning to take shape. By 6 weeks, blood cell formation is underway in the liver, where lymphocytes are now present. This type of white blood cell is a key part of the developing immune system. The diaphragm, the primary muscle used in breathing, is largely formed by 6 weeks. A portion of the intestine now protrudes temporarily into the umbilical cord. This normal process, called physiologic herniation, makes room for other developing organs in the abdomen. At 6 weeks, the handplates develop a subtle flattening. Brain waves have been recorded as early as 6 weeks and 2 days. Nipples appear along the sides of the trunk, shortly before reaching their final location on the front of the chest. By 6.5 weeks, the elbows are distinct. The fingers are beginning to separate, and hand movement can be seen. Bone formation, called ossification, begins within the clavicle or collarbone and the bones of the upper and lower jaw. Hiccups have been observed by 7 weeks. Leg movements can now be seen, along with a startle response. The 4-chambered heart is largely complete. On average, the heart now beats 167 times per minute. Electrical activity of the heart, recorded at 7.5 weeks, reveals a wave pattern similar to the adults. In females, the ovaries are identifiable by 7 weeks. By 7.5 weeks, the pigmented retina of the eye is easily seen, and the eyelids are beginning a period of rapid growth. Fingers are separate. and toes are joined only at the bases. The hands can now come together, as can the feet. Knee joints are also present. At 8 weeks, the brain is highly developed and constitutes almost half of the embryo's total body weight. Growth continues at an extraordinary rate. By 8 weeks, 75% of embryos exhibit right-hand dominance. The remainder is equally divided between left-handed dominance and no preference. This is the earliest evidence of right or left-handed behaviour. Pediatric textbooks describe the ability to roll over as appearing 10 to 20 weeks after birth. However, this impressive coordination is displayed much earlier in the low-gravity environment of the fluid-filled amniotic sac. Only the lack of strength required to overcome the higher gravitational force outside the uterus prevents newborns from rolling over. The embryo is becoming more physically active during this time. Motions may be slow or rapid, single or repetitive, spontaneous or reflexive. Head rotation, neck extension, and hand-to-face contact occur more often. Touching the embryo elicits squinting, jaw movement, grasping motions, and toe pointing. Between 7 and 8 weeks, the upper and lower eyelids rapidly grow over the eyes and partially fuse together. Although there is no air in the uterus, the embryo displays intermittent breathing motions by 8 weeks. By this time, kidneys produce urine, which is released into the amniotic fluid. In male embryos, the developing testes begin to produce and release testosterone. The bones, joints, muscles, nerves, and blood vessels of the limbs closely resemble those in adults. By 8 weeks, the epidermis, or outer skin, becomes a multi-layered membrane, losing much of its transparency. Eyebrows grow as hair appears around the mouth. 8 weeks marks the end of the embryonic period. During this time, the human embryo has grown from a single cell into the nearly 1 billion cells, which form over 4,000 distinct anatomic structures. The embryo now possesses more than 90% of the structures found in adults. The fetal period continues until birth. By 9 weeks, thumb sucking begins, and the fetus can swallow amniotic fluid. The fetus can also grasp an object, move the head forward and back, open and close the jaw, move the tongue, sigh and stretch. Nerve receptors in the face, the palms of the hands, and the soles of the feet can sense light touch. In response to a light touch on the sole of the foot, the fetus will bend the hip and knee and may curl the toes. The eyelids are now completely closed. In the larynx, the appearance of vocal ligaments signals the onset of vocal cord development. In female fetuses, the uterus is identifiable, and immature reproductive cells called oogonia are replicating within the ovary. External genitalia begin to distinguish themselves as either male or female. A burst of growth between 9 and 10 weeks increases body weight by over 75%. By 10 weeks, stimulation of the upper eyelid causes a downward rolling of the eye. The fetus yawns and often opens and closes the mouth. Most fetuses suck the right thumb. Sections of intestine within the umbilical cord are returning to the abdominal cavity. Ossification is underway in most bones. Fingernails and toenails begin to develop. Unique fingerprints appear 10 weeks after fertilization. These patterns can be used for identification throughout life. By 11 weeks, the nose and lips are completely formed. As with every other body part, their appearance will change at each stage of the human life cycle. The intestine starts to absorb glucose and water, swallowed by the fetus. Though sex is determined at fertilization, external genitalia can now be distinguished as male or female. Between 11 and 12 weeks, fetal weight increases nearly 60%. 12 weeks marks the end of the first third or trimester of pregnancy. Distinct taste buds now cover the inside of the mouth. By birth, taste buds will remain only on the tongue and roof of the mouth. Bowel movements begin as early as 12 weeks and continue for about 6 weeks. The material first expelled from the fetal and newborn colon is called meconium. It is composed of digestive enzymes, proteins, and dead cells shed by the digestive tract. By 12 weeks, upper limb length has nearly reached its final proportion to body size. The lower limbs take longer to attain their ultimate proportions. With the exception of the back and the top of the head, the body of the entire fetus now responds to light touch. Sex-dependent developmental differences appear for the first time. For instance, female fetuses exhibit jaw movement more frequently than males. In contrast to the withdrawal response seen earlier, stimulation near the mouth now evokes a turning toward the stimulus and an opening of the mouth. This response is called the rooting reflex, and it persists after birth, helping the newborn find his or her mother's nipple during breastfeeding. The face continues to mature as fat deposits begin to fill out the cheeks and tooth development begins. By 15 weeks, blood-forming stem cells arrive and multiply in the bone marrow. Most blood cell formation will occur here. Although movement begins in a 6-week embryo, a pregnant woman first senses fetal movement between 14 and 18 weeks. Traditionally, this event has been called quickening. By 16 weeks, procedures involving the insertion of a needle into the abdomen of the fetus trigger a hormonal stress response, releasing noradrenaline or norepinephrine into the bloodstream. Newborns and adults display a similar response to invasive procedures. In the respiratory system, the bronchial tree is now nearly complete. A protective white substance, called vernix caseosa, now covers the fetus. Vernix protects the skin from the irritating effects of amniotic fluid. From 19 weeks, fetal movement, breathing activity, and heart rate begin to follow daily cycles called circadian rhythms. By 20 weeks, the cochlea, which is the organ of hearing, has reached adult size within the fully developed inner ear. From now on, the fetus will respond to a growing range of sounds. Hair begins to grow on the scalp. All skin layers and structures are present, including hair follicles and glands. By 21 to 22 weeks after fertilization, the lungs gain some ability to breathe air. This is considered the age of viability because survival outside the womb becomes possible for some fetuses. A long succession of medical advances is making it possible to sustain the lives of prematurely born infants. By 24 weeks, the eyelids reopen, and the fetus exhibits a blink-startle response. This reaction to sudden, loud noises typically develops earlier in the female fetus. Several investigators report exposure to loud noise may adversely affect fetal health. Immediate consequences include prolonged increased heart rate, excessive fetal swallowing, and abrupt behavioural changes. Possible long-term consequences include hearing loss. The fetal respiratory rate can rise as high as 44 inhalation-exhalation cycles per minute. During the third trimester of pregnancy, rapid brain growth consumes more than 50% of the energy used by the fetus. Brain weight increases between 400 and 500%. By 26 weeks, the eyes produce tears. The pupils respond to light as early as 27 weeks. This response regulates the amount of light reaching the retina throughout life. All components required for a functioning sense of smell are operational. Studies of premature babies reveal the ability to detect odours as early as 26 weeks after fertilization. Placing a sweet substance in the amniotic fluid increases the rate of fetal swallowing. In contrast, decreased fetal swallowing follows the introduction of a bitter substance. Altered facial expressions often follow. Through a series of step-like leg motions similar to walking, the fetus performs somersaults. The fetus appears less wrinkled as additional fat deposits form beneath the skin. Fat plays a vital role in maintaining body temperature and storing energy after birth. By 28 weeks, the fetus can distinguish between high and low-pitched sounds. By 30 weeks, breathing movements are more common and occur 30 to 40% of the time in an average fetus. During the last 4 months of pregnancy, the fetus displays periods of coordinated activity, punctuated by periods of rest. These behavioural states reflect the ever-increasing complexity of the central nervous system. By approximately 32 weeks, true alveoli, or air pocket cells, begin developing in the lungs. They will continue to form until 8 years after birth. At 35 weeks, the fetus has a firm hand grasp. Fetal exposure to various substances appears to affect flavour preferences after birth. For instance, fetuses whose mothers consumed anise, a substance which gives licorice its taste, showed a preference for anise after birth. Newborns without fetal exposure disliked anise. The fetus initiates labour by releasing large amounts of a hormone called estrogen, and thus begins the transition from fetus to newborn. Labour is marked by powerful contractions of the uterus, resulting in childbirth. From fertilization to birth and beyond, human development is dynamic, continuous, and complex. New discoveries about this fascinating process increasingly show the vital impact of fetal development on lifelong health. As our understanding of early human development advances, so too will our ability to enhance health both before and after birth.